Good morning, good afternoon, LinkedIn. Happy Thursday. Welcome to another edition of Let's Build HubSpot Onboarding with Willem. How you doing, man?
It's yourself.
I am doing great. It's been an interesting week. Lots of things going on to um, launch into 2025, we'll say. It's going to be hard to take a break. I think a break is needed, though, probably before the year starts. So, been thinking about that. Meanwhile, we've got more people um, coming over to the HubSpot side. I think, as far as new customers, new people looking into it, hearing stories from just about every corner, uh, including you know we're going to talk about today some new customers that are being introduced to HubSpot and some some wins and some challenges related to that, but also some agencies and some people that are serving uh, these customers that are finding out that they need to build up their own HubSpot skills, which they may not have been planning to do because they keep running into it out in the market. So um, it's a good thing they've got us, right?
But the question is, what kind of skills do you need? Those two may not align.
Right, right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So today, you
But
brought a,
also, who's buying? Sorry, we
yeah,
have a buying HubSpot and also who is using HubSpot. If I buy HubSpot, and let's say I'm the CFO, and you will be using the product, all I'm trying to do potentially is as the CFO, as the budget holder, I try to give as little of the budget as possible. So one of the potentially nice examples that, well, maybe not nice, but one of the examples is that a customer recently purchased HubSpot. And during the sales process, the person on their side who was kind of responsible for negotiating the price was like, onboarding? The what? Why do we need that? No, no, no. We are really, really golden and we know our stuff. We don't need that. So they basically agreed with us, or we agreed with them, depending on how you look at it. We will waive the onboarding. And guess what happens?
you don't get onboarding. That's what happens.
Really? But then how are we supposed to understand the product? And there's always onboarding. Why did that happen?
You tell me, man. Well, it's probably hard for you to say. So I think what we wanted to talk about today is how to avoid this situation at all costs. I would say is that fair?
Yeah. And I'm going to start off with you. Do you have any fixed thoughts about that before I give my opinion?
I mean, I
There's so much to
understand
talk about there. I know.
I understand how it happens, right? Um, you got people trying to hit KPIs on both sides. Like on the HubSpot side, we've got to sell stuff. On the user side, on the customer side, we've got budgets to hit. And half the time we know that we really, really need HubSpot. We need something like HubSpot. We've done all the work to to make it a fit, to get the buy-in in the organization. And we'll be damned if we let something like onboarding costs get in the way of that, right? But like we know what happens, or we're seeing what happens, and that's what we talk about every week about, like, the fact that you can even, you know, like, maybe that's the habit that we got to find a way to remove the fact that you can even not include, like, onboarding in some way. Like, that shouldn't even be an option, right? If it were up to us, it would not be an option. It's like, no, this is the product that you're buying. The first step after you buy, like, this is the first piece of the product, is onboarding, right? So I get why it happens, but that's why we're here, every week to try and help people understand how important this piece is. And I'm excited to talk about today how you can maneuver as a salesperson or during the sales process to avoid that ask, to address that ask when it happens, to help set expectations. Because when it does get waived, I mean, we haven't even talked about it being waived on this show. We've talked about how it goes wrong when it does happen, let
But
alone when it
not if
gets
it doesn't
waived,
happen at all.
right? So I'm, yeah, looking forward to your thoughts on this topic for sure.
If I look at it, I look at it through three different lenses at the same time, and that makes it kind of harder to see the full picture. But on the other hand, it makes it a lot more clear on the full picture. I look at things with onboarding through, but also selling through the lens of an individual contributor, and how individual contributors typically look at things is like time. I only have a limited amount of time. I need to do a certain amount of things. How the bloody am I gonna do all of that in that amount of time? So let's say if I'm a sales rep, I need to close X amount of money in that time. What does every salesperson complain about? I don't have enough time to do it. And that's an individual contributor. Then you have, but on the side of the buyer, the individual contributor is like, okay, so now we're going to roll out this thing called HubSpot. Is it actually going to save me time? So, from the buyer side, how are you going to make sure that HubSpot is a solution that is basically embraced by the workforce because it saves time, because people see what it can do for them, not to the organization. No, I only care about myself. That's how things work in life. That's how you typically think as an individual contributor, and maybe not in that way, but you get what I mean. You have to manage your time. That's your most valuable resource. If you're a sales manager who's trying to sell, you have quotas. Better make sure that your region that you manage as a sales manager hits the quota. How are you going to do that? If you're on the buying side and if you're a manager, how do I make sure that it will become a success for my department? If I'm a marketing manager, do I care what sales does in my organization? We all know the misalignment there. And I know that I'm being really harsh right now. And then we get to the C level. They look at the impact and the business outcomes. So if we're selling something, shouldn't we look at, okay, what is the impact if I buy or if I sell you something that is not going to be successful? I think that as HubSpot, we should be pretty proud that we have a significant higher than average adoption rate. How do we keep it that high? What happens if we say, well, implementation, onboarding? Well, on the buyer side, if you're a C-level person and if I can't explain to you the value of that line item, platform onboarding 20K, What are you going to do with it?
I'm not going to see the value, first of all, because you're not giving it to me. And then that means I don't want to pay if there's no value.
Yeah. And that is where I think, like, if I'm the salesperson and if I can tell you, like, okay, this is what we're going to sell you, typical, what I'm going to say now for now, onboarding, but platform usage, because that's what it truly is for me, is like a year, you're going to pay me 60K to have the product, not the onboarding, but just the product. You know what? If you pay me that 20K, it's not going to take you uh, the year and a half that it will take you if you don't do onboarding, because the average may be a year, but if you don't do onboarding or platform setup or however you want to call it, it will take you longer. If you do spend not the 20K with me, but you're going to spend, I'm going to basically rip you off a little bit, or so it seems. I'm going to say, I'm going to spend more time. I'm going to charge you 40K, but you will be up and running in 2 months' time. That will save you 40K in total, plus whatever ROI the platform has. Then all of a sudden, if you're a manager, you're going to say, that's not my budget. I don't care. If you're an individual contributor, you're going to say, what are you talking about? But if you're a C-level person, you're going to say, yeah, let's not skip the 20K. Let's make it 40K. And that is where I feel like, how much effort should you as a salesperson put in there? And where should you try to make sure there is more support, not less?
Yeah, I think, well, does it just come down to setting the expectations of onboarding, like in the first place?
A little bit. But what I just said was platform setup and not just onboarding. And I think that if you think about what I'm going to sell you with onboarding, or if you think about what I'm going to sell you with platform setup, and you will just have to base it on my wording. You don't get a description, you get none of that. Your expectation will be drastically different, because
Yeah,
onboarding is, yeah, I'm going to hold your hand, I'm going to tell you this button will actually send an email. While with platform setup, you expect me to make sure that there's an email template in place.
right. So all of our favorite words when it comes to getting started up, like implementation, configuration.
I
Uh,
like that word.
yeah, it is configuration plus customization, like in one word. I, I might use that. Um, but onboarding, training, uh, and setup, right? Like all mean different things. Um, but anything that's related to, okay, this is what happens when you get started, not defining that, and we don't have to get super granular, um, but we have to make sure that the customer is clear on what it means, whatever words that we're using, right?
I'm going to question that slightly. Shouldn't we be super granular? If you sell me HubSpot, and you know likely even better than I do what the product is, and if I'm a C-level person who just comes in my fancy car, and I really don't understand what everybody is doing, and you sell me onboarding, you're gonna charge a certain amount. Is that including or excluding the email setup? Is that including or excluding the quote template? If you don't have that in writing, yeah, then I'm probably gonna lash out at you saying, but it was the full onboarding, and why is that not in there? Isn't that necessary for the team to work? And based on that question, all you can say is, yeah, it is necessary.
Yeah. Okay. So you
And
make a good point where like the granularity comes with, at least in this case, with which tools are being set up, um, and not necessarily the how, because it's the how that I was thinking of about like who's involved and when it needs to happen. Like at a certain level, um, I notice, especially with C-suite, it's like gets too granular and they start to discount the fact that they need to know about it or its value in general, or it seems so easy that one of our people should be able to do it. So can we get a discount if we don't get that part? Right. So that's the balance that I think you got to find. And that's also why salespeople like to keep it high level
yeah,
so that they can avoid distractions like that. And because it's either, because often if that realization hits, like the more things you put in front of a C-suite or definitely a manager, it takes them time to ask those questions to themselves and to the other people in the organization. And those are the things that like will drag on a sales process or you know, kill a deal sometimes, right? So I think that's the balance. But I think the way you put it, the granularity, especially as HubSpot is not well understood across the different hubs about what you are getting when you make a purchase. I think that's should be it, like at least like that's the um, like customers should have at least that expectation that I know exactly which tools are being set up during this process.
yeah. And for me, the question is, if you're a C-level person, should I just say, well, you know what, we're going to do, what kind of onboarding do you want to do? We have 20K, we have 10K, we have 5K. Pick one that you want. And I would probably kind of keep it at that. And I'm going to say, here's a document, know which one to pick. It will give you an outline of what is what. You're going to sign the dotted line, pick whatever you want. And if you sign the one for 5K, and you're going to come back to me saying, why isn't the quote in there? There's your document. Didn't you read that? Do you want to? And if I'm a partner, do you want to spend another 15K with me? Shall we make sure that everything runs smoothly? And by now, you as a C-level person realize we're already in there for 60K. Might as well make it count.
Yeah.
So I
Uh,
don't think that in the whole conversation with a C-level person, you should go into the full detail of why do you need a quote template set up. No, you should just say, okay, what do you want? Here is the thing that you can sign for. And this is what it roughly gives you. And what I think is a really bad practice is if I would sell you onboarding and I'm going to say, what do you want? 5K, 10K, or 20K? For 5K, you get 25 hours. I'm just making something up right now. For 10K, you get twice as much. And for, because does that tell you anything? What do you get for 20 hours? Does it take 20 hours to make a quote template? Or is the entire portal set up in 20 hours?
yeah. I like your approach of the 5K, 10K, 20K. And if you were to list out tools, um, it's like build packages basically of the tools that would be set up. Now you're, I would think um, that you put both parties in a position to have a very clear conversation, like whatever the budget is, how do we get the tools that we need for our business into that budget? And it could be like, at 5K, there's these 10 things, and well, or let's say five things just to match uh the cost. So you got five things, 10 things, and 20 things. But in general, when you have the 20 things, might be more comprehensive setups in there. Um, and if you like quoting, for example, like if you really need that part, right? And it's over in these other places and you got to bring it in, like maybe it replaces all five things that are in the 5K, right? And at least you're in a position to have a very clear conversation about expectations and be able to speak to, like, well, it happens to be one of the most important points of adopting HubSpot as a sales tool. And in order to get quoting right, we need to do this, this, and this, and this, which happens to be five things. So that's why it's replaced like that. But now that you're doing it in the context of the 10K and the 20K, you're more likely to just they invest more, right? To get the thing that they need. And what I'm actually finding, I've had a good conversation with the CFO yesterday, and this is after the fact. Like they've already got HubSpot, they're trying to clean it up, and they want it to happen as fast as possible.
The fun part.
And
Yeah.
but what's interesting, and there's a board there, right, that are willing to spend money on solving this problem. But what the realization is like no matter which quote they're getting, right? It doesn't matter how many external people we could pay to solve this problem. It takes 2 to 3 months to get everybody inside the organization internally bought in and aligned. So, what are we actually paying extra for if if uh, the internal stakeholders and the internal contributors are required as a part of the process. Like we can't like we can do, and this is what we end up doing, right? We do a bunch of proof of concepting during the onboarding process, right? Okay, we're set up, but at some point somebody has to approve that we're set up. And it's not
Yeah.
somebody who's on our team. They haven't seen it yet. They haven't even been a part of the process. And so, since they have not been a part of the process, they are very unlikely to approve that it's set up. And now we're at the end of the onboarding process. And what do? Right? A lot of times it just doesn't get approved. And we don't change to actually using HubSpot for that thing. And now what are we paying for? Right. So I think setting that expectation uh, alongside this cost, right? Because a lot of times businesses think if they pay more upfront, things will happen faster, right? And that's not always the case.
No. But one of the things that HubSpot does with onboarding, it is like, okay, you're gonna get X amount of time, and I mean like X amount of hours with potentially an onboarding rep, and that has to happen within X amount of days. And I believe it's like 90 days. And if you haven't taken a single hour in those 90 days, you just paid for nothing. Happy days. I mean, like, I'm okay with that. Maybe you as a customer aren't, but that does give you a fair bit of leverage saying, okay, I have your signature for the onboarding. You paid me 20K. I have built out the quote. I have built it out on time. You have 20 days to approve. Otherwise, it's approved. And I believe that should be in the contract. Well, maybe not 20 days, whatever basically suits. But there should always be something in there like if you drop the ball, that's on you.
Yeah. As we talk about this out loud, this is one of those long lasting challenges I think I look forward to AI solving on our behalf. Um, because as soon as, first of all, like the hourly management of activities like this are just setting people up for uh, for failure, in my opinion, because it just sets a wrong kind of measurement and how it's going to work. Uh, and if you base it on some outcomes and some goals, like you say, like we need to be able to quote out of this tool,
Yeah,
by X date, right? There's going to be like, I imagine a world where some of the people are just taken out of the equation and you're interacting with an AI assistant, let's say, or AI onboarding manager, and it gives you a list. Like these are the tools that you wanted set up.
like a
Uh,
menu card.
right. You have to click the button if you want the tool set up, right?
Yeah,
And then, you know, um, because that's where the hours at that point will become minutes. And since it will become minutes and it's not a conversation, it'll come back in 60 seconds and say, all right, set up, approved, and
yeah, but
you
I'm
have
still going to
bots.
question that. Let's
Okay.
say for now that I ask your AI to generate me an email template, and it generates me three examples, and all three of them are stunning and they're absolutely fantastic. One has a yellow background, one has a light blue background, and one has an orange background. And it says basically after 60 seconds, which one do you want? Then it's final, and then we're good to go. And I'm sitting there. And guess what? After 3 hours, and after 6 days, you get what I mean. That
Yeah.
doesn't take away the buyer's indecision. And I
Right.
think that that is something that, unless you can, well, in a way, AI doesn't change that at all. It's still the same people that cause the same issues. And I would actually say, as soon as you implement enough AI, the people will change. And it not necessarily that AI will change the decision, but it is like I know that if I'm sitting there and having to press one of the three buttons, and if it's day 6 and I still haven't chosen, and I know that AI is around the corner, better press one button. It doesn't matter which one, just press one.
Oh, yes. And this is where like you get multiple stakeholders at levels like C-suite managers, contributors. Any one of those can help kind of push things forward by getting buy-in to how it's going to go. And like, okay, like, how often have you run into, or at least I have in the past, where the way you communicate with the person who needs to make the decision, the difference between, hey, I need your take on this, and if you've built trust and you're responsible for getting this thing done as the contributor. And instead, which they've probably told you in the past, like, I want you to get things done, don't let me hold you up, et cetera, et cetera. Instead, the ask is, hey, you have until tomorrow to give me feedback on this thing. If I do not hear from you, it's going out,
Yeah,
right? Creating situations like that. So it's, again, so much of this process is about trust, right? The process I just described with AI will not be successful until there's trust in AI. But I think an interesting dynamic, which also is a is subconsciously gets in the way of these activities, is interpersonal dynamics, like however direct or indirect they might be, like between humans just talking to each other. It's very easy to fall into a, why is he really saying that? Like, what's the agenda here? What's the angle? Why is he trying to get me to pick that one? Right? Once you, I've seen it real time, like once you replace that with AI and there's no reason to think there's an agenda, or it just takes that whole element out, which can make it, you know, a little bit easier to make those decisions because you're not, as a human, thinking about all these other variables that might be impacting the conversation you're having. And just very quickly, and of course, it will take some repetitions, some reps of this happening, where you could click the button and see it, and it gives it back to you like real time. All right, this is the one you picked. This is what our next email is going to look like. Oh no, I don't like that one. Let's try this other. That happens in real life, but it takes hours, days for that to happen, right? Because as a leader, I've already given you the okay. You sent it back to me like when you got it done in the color that I picked. Now I don't like it. I see it, but I don't have time to tell you in the right way so that you don't think, right? And then it takes a couple days to actually see the next option, right? So I think a lot of that happens, especially when we're in proof of concepting and onboarding and figuring out how this is going to work for our business. That gets removed from the process. Now, this is obviously we're talking about a future that's probably not that far away, in my opinion, but it's a future that's not exactly here yet. Um, so I did want to touch on before we wrap up. I know we're going a little long here. Um, what are your recommendations, or maybe something you're learning as you get into pre-sales mode, how to have these difficult conversations about, readiness?
My whole idea right now is we're trying to communicate uh, in a sales process on our level. And I think that we should try to communicate. If you're a seller, you should sell impact, and that should be on the C level. Because if you can get a buy in on the impact, then it's a lot easier to say, you know what, onboarding is part of that. Are you going to sell a car to somebody without a license? Or are you actually going to include that in the package? And for everybody who is like, yeah, what, you know what, I'm going to buy a Formula One car for a team that can't drive a car. Maybe, just maybe. And I think that that should be the key takeaway. Understand that you're selling impact, not a product.
Yes. Oh, it's a good way to put it. And when you're honest about what that means, if you want that impact, most I have not interacted with a person yet that does not appreciate that level of honesty and authenticity during the sales process, and it builds trust. Like, look, this is not an easy button. This is where I would love if it were unified, if it were unified, fast, easy, instead of easy, fast, unified. Because if we don't have the unification first, including all the people involved, watch it not be very easy or very fast. Um, so I think that's a good point. Like, focus on the impact. We all know these tools can have a massive impact, but it relates so much to the expectations out of the gate. Um, so we hope this was helpful. I think that's a good thing to uh, yeah, end on until next week. So think about uh, if you're, I guess, a partner or on the sales side of things in HubSpot, um, you know, think about these conversations, like, and ask around, like ask for help if there's uncomfort, if there's discomfort, and you think that you're risking, your quota or any of these other reasons that we choose to get rid of onboarding or place less importance on it. Um, Take a look, talk to some people around you, find those opportunities, and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody. Awesome.